What a second copy, what a duplication also allows you to do in the most metaphorical sense is experiment with one of the copies, because the other one is there taking care of whatever the function is that's critical. What you will see is you get faster evolution going on with genes that you have duplicated, where one of them is the one that in a sense is freed to have more dramatic movement, and what you then see is it's more likely to stumble into some great use without sacrificing the initial use in the process. And there's a guy, University of Oregon, named Joe Thornton, who's done really interesting work on the evolution of genes for steroid receptors. And what he has shown from ancestral genes is that's exactly what's occurred. A lot of what are now two different genes for two different types of steroid receptors were once duplicates of the same gene, and one was allowed to float and eventually, in at least some cases, stumbled into something useful while the other one held into place. In passing, what that phenomenon does is help explain one of the endless, frustrating, exasperating, irritating things that people who attack the notion of evolution bring up, which is the famed soundbite that they have of the problem of irreducible complexity. It always runs the same way, which is saying evolution can't possibly exist because what good is half of an eye? You've got to have those intermediate forms, and what good is it? You couldn't have invented an eye. Evolution could not have produced an eye in one mutation, one generation, and thus it would have to be in a series of steps. And what good are the series of steps? They can't exist. There can't be anything such as evolution. Off you go, hallelujah. So what you get here in these cases is a demonstration instead by having extra copies of genes, one of which is freed to be evolving. You don't have to have a rapid transition from one to the other. You can have this thing moving along, stumbling along, until it just happens to come up with a shape of a receptor that just happens to be able to bind a hormone that stumbled its own way into existence 10,000 generations earlier, which, because it was duplicated, it didn't matter that one copy was now of a form where there was no receptor on Earth for it until it happened to stumble into that. And there's more and more evidence that duplicated genes have a way of describing these intermediate states where you don't necessarily have half an eye, but instead you have the pieces ready in place there for when one thing suddenly pops up which completes the picture. In fact, you can have, as it turns out, sort of half an eye. Russ Fernald in the biology department has done really cool research on the evolution of eyes, and you should read about it sometime, to read basically how eyes evolved from like a single layer of cells on the surface of some ancient proto-something, and you sure can have half an eye and a gazillion intermediate forms. Nonetheless, this business of multiple copies allowing you the freedom to have looser evolving of single genes at a time, critical mechanism.